At the end of chapter 54 of Nicholas Nickleby, Ralph, his uncle, was left foaming at the mouth and speechless with rage. He had plotted to marry Madeline Bray, the beautiful young woman with whom Nicholas is in love, to Arthur Gride, who is a miser who is not only old enough to be her grandfather, but whose secret plan was to steal her inheritance. Now, all this had been delayed by the appearance of Nicholas and his sister Kate, and finally stopped altogether by the unexpected and most timely death of Madeline's father. Nicholas had taken Madeline in his arms and carried her away with her servant and his sister to the home they shared with his mother and Smike. Smike, you remember, is the orphan boy whom he had saved from the clutches of Wackford squeers. The picture that Dickens gives of Nicholas' mother is of a kind but foolish woman who manages to misunderstand and misconstrue almost everything, thus causing confusion to reign supreme. Even so, in spite of her foolishness, she does get some things right. One of them is that Mr. Frank Cheeryble, the nephew of Nicholas' employers, who were also steadfast friends of Madeline Bray, Frank is beginning to fall in love with Nicholas' sister, Kate. Now, it's at this point that Nicholas begins to get things wrong. You see, he had missed all the romantic indications given by Frank in relation to Kate that his mother had recognized. And he's horrified at what might appear to be that in suggesting a marriage between Frank and Kate, his mother would be opening them to an accusation to the same kind of scheming with which his uncle had tried to arrange a marriage between Madeline and Arthur Gride. In the meantime, Madeline, who had become ill through shock and distress, has been cared for by Kate upstairs in the home where Nicholas and his mother, Kate, and Smike live. They became firm friends, in spite of Mrs. Nickleby's well-intentioned but disastrous attempts at making them so. She tried to do something else too, and this concerned Smike. He also had become ill. Indeed, he appeared to be getting weaker every day, sometimes having to be helped from room to room. Now, Dickens very clearly intends that we should understand that Smike is suffering from consumption. That was the name given in the 19th century to tuberculosis. And at that time it was incurable, and it's pretty obvious that Smike is going to die quite soon. Mrs. Nickleby, out of kind but completely misguided thinking, has persuaded the doctor to instruct Nicholas to take Smike away to a place in the country where it was hoped his health would improve. And of course, this was the last thing that would help poor Smike, because it would take him away from Kate, with whom he is desperately in love. However, Mrs. Nickleby gets her way, And chapter 55 ends with Nicholas and Smike being driven away in a coach, from which Smike is given what he thinks will be the last glimpse of the woman he loves. So that was a précis of chapter 55. As we begin chapter 56, let me remind you of Peg Sliderskew's intentions concerning her master. If you remember, I warned you that we had to keep an eye on her because she was going to be quite a significant person in the story. Foolishly, Arthur Gride had allowed her to see where he kept his secret papers, which included the evidence of his misdemeanors and crimes. So we encounter Ralph Nickleby and Arthur Gride just as Nicholas has carried Madeline away. With clenched hands and teeth ground together so firm and tight that no locking of the jaws could have fixed and riveted them more securely, Ralph stood for some minutes in the attitude in which he had last addressed his nephew, breathing heavily, but as rigid and motionless in other respects as if he had been a human statue. After a time, he began by slow degrees, as a man rousing himself from heavy slumber, to relax. For a moment he shook his clasped fist toward the door by which Nicholas had disappeared, and then, thrusting it into his breast, as if to repress by force even this show of passion, turned round and confronted the less tardy usurer, Arthur Gride, who had not yet risen from the ground. The cowering wretch, who still shook in every limb and whose very few grey hairs trembled and quivered on his head with abject dismay, tottered to his feet as he met Ralph's eye, and shielding his face with both his hands, protested, while he crept towards the door, that it was no fault of his. "Who said it was?" returned Ralph, with a suppressed anger. "Who said it was?" "You looked at me as if you thought I was to blame," said Gride timidly. "Oh, nonsense," muttered Ralph, forcing a laugh. "I blame Bray for not living 1 hour longer. 1 hour longer! Oh, just 1 hour would have been long enough. I blame no one else but Bray." No one else?" said Gride. "Not for this mischance," replied Ralph. "I have an old score to clear with that young fellow who has carried off your mistress. But that has nothing to do with his blustering just now, for we shall soon have been quit of him but for this cursed accident." There was something so unnatural in the calmness with which Ralph Nickleby spoke when he coupled with his face. There was something so unnatural and ghastly in the contrast between his harsh, slow, steady voice, only altered by a certain haltering of the breath which made him pause between almost every word like a drunken man bent upon speaking plainly, and his face as evidence of intense and violent passion, and the struggle he made to keep it under, that if the dead body which lay above had stood still instead of him, before the cowering Gride. It could scarcely have presented a spectacle which would have terrified him more. "The coach," said Ralph, after a time, during which he had struggled like some strong man against a fit. "We came in a coach. Is it still there?" Gride gladly availed himself of the pretext of going to the window to see. Ralph, keeping his face steadily the other way, tore at his shirt with the hand he thrust in his breast, and muttered in a hoarse whisper, £10,000, he said. £10,000. That is the precise sum paid in but yesterday for the 2 mortgages, which should have gone out again today at heavy interest. If the house has failed, if the brokers are ruined, and he is the first to bring me the news, that would be the end. Is the coach still there?" Yes, said Gride, startled by the fierce tone of the inquiry. "It's here. Oh, dearie me, what a fiery man you are." "Come here," said Ralph, beckoning to him. "We mustn't make a show of being disturbed. We'll go down arm in arm." "Oh, but you pinch me black and blue," urged Gride. Ralph let him go impatiently, and descending the stairs with his usual firm and heavy tread, got into the coach. Arthur followed him, and looking doubtfully at Ralph when the man asked where he was to drive, and finding that he remained silent, expressed no wish upon the subject, Arthur mentioned his own house, and thither they proceeded. On their way, Ralph sat in the furthest corner with folded arms and uttered not a word. With his chin sunk on his breast and his downcast eyes quite hidden by the contraction of his knotted brows, he might have been asleep, for any sign of consciousness he gave until the coach stopped, when he raised his head and, glancing through the window, inquired, "What place is this?" "My house," answered the disconsolate Gride, affected perhaps by its loneliness. "Oh dear, my house." "True," said Ralph. "I haven't observed the way we came. I suppose you would have a glass of water in the house. I should like a glass of water." "You shall have a glass of whatever you like," answered Gride. "It's no use knocking, coachman. Ring the bell." The bell rang and rang and rang again, then knocked until the street re-echoed with the sounds, then listened at the keyhole of the door. Nobody came. The house was as silent as the grave. "What's going on?" said Ralph impatiently. "Oh, Peg is so deaf," answered Gride with a look of anxiety and alarm. Oh dear, ring again, coachman. She sees the bell." Again the coachman rang, knocked and rang. Some of the neighbours threw up their windows and called across the street to each other that old Gride's housekeeper must have dropped down dead. Others collected round the coach and gave vent to various surmises. Some held that she'd fallen asleep, some that she'd burnt herself to death, some that she'd got drunk. One very fat man suggested that she'd seen something to eat which had frightened her so much, not being used to seeing it, that she'd fallen into a fit. This last suggestion particularly delighted the bystanders, who cheered it up uproariously. and were with some difficulty deterred from dropping into the area that is the lower basement apartment, and breaking open the kitchen door to ascertain the fact. Nor was this all. Rumours having gone abroad that Arthur was to be married that morning, very particular inquiries were made after the bride. Where was the bride? So the majority held that she was disguised in the person of Mr. Ralph Nickleby, which gave rise to much jocose indignation at the public appearance of a bride in boots and pantaloons, and called forth a very great many hoots and groans and catcalls. At length the two money-lenders obtained shelter in a house next door, and being accommodated with a ladder, clambered over the wall of the backyard, which was not a high one, and descended in safety on the other side. I'm almost afraid to go in, I declare, said Arthur, turning to Ralph when they were alone. Supposing she's been murdered, lying with her brains knocked out by the poker, eh? Well, supposing she were, said Ralph. I tell you, I wish such things were more common than they are, and more easily done. You may stare and shiver, I do. He applied himself to a pump in the yard, and having taken a deep draught of water and flung a quantity on his head and face, regained his accustomed manner and led the way into the house, Gride following close at his heels. It was the same dark place as ever, every room dismal and silent as it was wont to be, every ghostly article of furniture in its customary place, the iron heart of the grim old clock undisturbed by all the noise without still beat heavily within its dusty case, the tottering presses slunk from the sight as usual in their melancholy corners, the echoes of footsteps returned the same dreary sound, the long-legged spider paused in his nimble run, and, scared by the sight of the men in that his dull domain, hung motionless on the wall, counterfeiting death until they should have passed him by. From cellar to garret went the two usurers, opening every creaking door and looking into every deserted room, but no Peg was there. At last they sat down in the apartment which Arthur Gride usually inhabited, to rest after their search. "The hag is out, I suppose," said Ralph, "on some preparation for your wedding festivities. See here, I destroy the bond. We shall never need it now." He was preparing to depart. Gride, who had been peering narrowly into the room, fell at that moment with his knees knocking together before a large chest, and uttered a terrible yell. "How now?" said Ralph, looking sternly round. "Robbed! Robbed!" screamed Arthur Gride. "Robbed? What, of money?" "No, no, no! Worse, far worse!" "Of what?" demanded Ralph. "Worse than money, worse than money!" cried the old man, casting the papers out of the chest like some beast tearing up the earth. "She'd better have stolen money, all my money. I haven't got much. She'd better have made me a beggar than have done this." "Done what?" said Ralph. "Done what, you devil's dotard?" Still Gride made no answer, but tore and snatched among the papers, and yelled and screeched like a fiend in torment. "There is something missing, you say?" said Ralph, shaking him furiously by the collar. "What is it?" "Papers! All my papers! I am a ruined man. Lost, lost, I am robbed, I am ruined. She saw me reading them of late. I did it very often. She watched me and saw me put them into the box. The box is gone. She's stolen it. Damnation seize her. She's robbed me. Of what? Cried Ralph, on whom a sudden light appeared to break, for his eyes flashed and his frame trembled with agitation as he clutched Gride by his bony arm. What has she stolen? She doesn't know what it is. She can't read, shrieked Gride, not hearing the inquiry. There's only one way in which the money can be made of it, and that's by taking it to her. Somebody will read it for her and tell her what to do. She and her accomplice will get money for it and be let off besides, and they'll make a merit of it, say they found it, knew it, and it'll be evidence against me. The only person it will fall upon is me. Patience, said Ralph, clutching him still tighter and eyeing him with a sidelong look so fixed and eager as sufficiently to denote that he had some hidden purpose in what he was about to say. Hear reason. She can't have gone long. I'll call the police. Do you but give the information of what she has stolen, and they'll lay hands upon her. Trust me. Here, help. No, screamed the old man, putting his hand on Ralph's mouth. I can't, I daren't. Help, cried Ralph. No, shrieked the other, stamping on the ground with the energy of a madman. I tell you, no, I daren't. Daren't make this robbery public? Said Ralph. No, rejoined Gride, wringing his hands. Hush, not a word of this, not a word must be said. I am undone. Whichever way I turn, I am undone. I am betrayed. I shall be given up. I shall die in Newgate. Newgate was a prison. With frantic exclamations such as these, and with many others in which grief, fear, rage, all emotions such as these were strangely blended in, the panic-stricken wretch gradually subdued his first loud outcry until it had softened down into a low, despairing moan, checkered now and then by a howl, as though going over such papers as were left in the chest, he discovered some new loss. With very little excuse for departing so abruptly, Ralph left him, and greatly disappointing the loiterers outside the house by telling them that there was nothing the matter, got into the coach and was driven to his own home. A letter lay on his table. He let it lie there for some time, as if he hadn't had the courage to open it. But at length he did so, and turned deadly pale. The worst has happened, he said. The brokering house has failed. I see the rumour was abroad in the city last night, and reached the ears of those merchants. Well. He strode violently up and down the room and stopped again. You see, Bray's death meant that the brokering house, which would have held the mortgages, the loans, that Ralph Nickleby was about to reissue at very high and punitive interest. The brokering house had failed. The mortgages were worthless. He had lost £10,000. £10,000, and only lying there for a day, for one day. How many anxious years, how many pinching days and sleepless nights before I scraped together that £10,000. £10,000! How many proud painted dames would have fawned and smiled, and how many spendthrift blockheads done me lip service to my face and cursed me in their hearts, while I turned that £10,000 into 20. Grant that I had doubled it, made cent per cent, for every sovereign told another. There would have been one piece of money in all that heap which wouldn't represent 10,000 mean and paltry lies told not by the money-lender, but by the money-borrowers. They borrowed the money. They would have had to have paid it back. But now I've lost it all. Striving, as it would seem, to lose part of the bitterness of his regret in the bitterness of these other thoughts, Ralph continued to pace the room. There was less and less of resolution in his manner as his mind gradually reverted to his loss. At length, dropping into his elbow chair and grasping its sides so firmly that they creaked again, he said, "The time has been when nothing could have moved me by the loss of this great sum. Nothing. For births, marriages, deaths, and all events which interest other men, I have no interest. But now, I swear, I mix up with the loss the triumph of my nephew in telling it to me. It's as if he brought it about. I almost feel as if he had. I couldn't hate him more than I do. Let me but retaliate upon him by degrees, however slow. Let me but get the better of him. Let me but turn the scale, and I can bear it." His meditations were long and deep. They terminated in his dispatching a letter by Newman addressed to Mr. Squeers at the Saracen's Head, with instructions to inquire whether he had arrived in town, and if so, to wait for an answer. Newman brought back the information that Mr. Squeers had indeed come by mail that morning and had received the letter in bed, but that he sent his duty and word that he would get up directly and wait upon Mr. Nickleby without delay.